Back to my channel. So I'm carrying on reviewing the article about the neurodiversity movement, or the neurodiversity paradigm to be more precise, and how the variability in autism poses a challenge for the neurodiversity paradigm in terms of whether or not it can be applied to the whole of autism or autisms. Some autisms might be more compatible with the neurodiversity paradigm than others. So I got up to a bit about autism as identity. Now, the autism as identity argument defends the assertion that autism is not intrinsically harmful, as opposed to person first, where the disorder is a separable fact about the person. The idea is that it is not possible to separate autism from the person, as this would then result in a different person. For example, Sinclair, who's autistic, thinks that the person who ceased to be autistic would cease to exist. A weaker version rests on the idea of identity as comprising aspects of oneself that you consider to be most important. And this suggests that autism provides something of value that outweighs the difficulty. But this cannot be generalised, as some do not identify with autism this way. In my own personal view, is that I would argue that the degree to which autism is egosyntonic, which is to say accepted as part of one's inner self as opposed to something alien, is the degree to which it gets in the way of your life goals. So if autism is not massively getting in the way of your life goals, your ambitions, your dreams, your aspirations, and autism is seen to be very much aligned with your inner sense of self, your inner aspirations, your inner dreams, your inner ambitions, not getting massively in the way of those, then autism may well be seen as egosyntonic and as part of your identity and as not something that you want to remove necessarily. However, if autism is getting in the way of what you want to achieve, it is getting in the way of your aspirations, it is getting in the way of your ambitions, you feel impoverished because of autism, you see things that actually you might want or choose to have if you were unencumbered by autism, then autism will be seen as ego-dystonic, as not part of who you are, as something that you have to fight against, as something alien, as an imposition, as something that gets in the way of your life. Then it's not going to be seen as part of your identity, but as something that you'd rather be without. And in my case, autism to me is ego-dystonic. I do not like being autistic. I have to accept, obviously, that I am, and that there's nothing I can do about it, because there is no cure for autism, at least not yet. There is no cure, and probably won't be for the foreseeable future, at least not for adults. So you have to accept it. That's not easy, but I cannot like being autistic. I will never like being autistic. It's something that how can I possibly like being autistic when it stops me doing so many different things that I'd otherwise want? I'd much rather be able to meaningfully connect with other people, because it's bloody lonely being autistic. And I would like to be able to have normal relationships with people. I'd like to be able to do things unencumbered by autism, essentially. So yes, so I'd rather not, and also, and I know some people say, oh, that's because you also have OCD. Now, I'd like to make this quite clear. Yes, OCD does make my life a lot harder, but I've talked about this elsewhere, how I see OCD as very much an emergent property of my autistic neurology. The two can't be easily separated. But even, assuming that is the case, when I was a child, before OCD had developed, autism was already stealing things from my life. Now, at that point in time, I was thankfully oblivious to the problems of this, And I have to say I had a pretty happy childhood. And compared to now, childhood was, I missed that time because I hadn't yet developed OCD, and at least not to the extent it is now. Obviously, the germ, if you like, the sort of seed, to put it another way, of OCD was there, and actually from a very young age, the thinking patterns that would later escalate for OCD were very much apparent. So actually, I would say that OCD in embryo form has actually been there basically ever since I've been able to understand language, but it certainly wasn't as big as what it is now, and I wasn't weighed down by anxiety in a way that I am now, and I was a lot more carefree, and yeah, I would say I had a happy childhood. Okay, but autism was still taking stuff away from me. The very fact I couldn't relate to other kids, the very fact I couldn't make friends meaningfully was setting me up for a lifetime of difficulty. At that point in time, I was not yet aware of this, but just because I wasn't aware of it as a kid and it wasn't troubling me as a kid, doesn't mean that, the autism doesn't mean still then my life would have been easier if I hadn't had the autism, because all of those problems were obviously going to get worse with the passage of time and bring me up to where I am now, a very disabled person who is, that is my life history. Obviously, if I'd had the right support, some of these problems may well not be as bad as what they are now. But even if I had had that support, the autism still would be there, and I would still be struggling to relate to people properly. I would still have gone through a lot of time without making proper friends, because that's autism. You can't really. That's a difficulty there. That is very difficult to completely ameliorate. Kids being kids and all that. All those learning challenges I had, they were obviously not core to the autism, the learning challenges, but again, I would say that they very much were an emergent property of my autistic neurology, bearing in mind, as I've already mentioned, how you can't really separate these things from autism, because what we include in autism is quite arbitrary outside of the core. And actually autism does usually go hand in hand with other difficulties, and the learning challenges in and of themselves were an emergent property of my autism because of my difficulties with comprehension. That's to do with difficulties with theory of mind, which is obviously going to make that element harder, and perceptual difficulties, which can then make other problems more hard, and so on. Sensory problems and so on. So yes, I do not see autism for me as a good thing, because it has held me back massively. And if I was able to understand information and process information in a typical way, I would have been able to have used my interests constructively. I would by now, I would have a good job, because if you were to look at me, my personality, who I actually am, which is separable from the autism, I like to be productive. These are values I hold. I like to be productive, I'm determined, I'm motivated, and I get interested in things. Now, if I wasn't autistic, all of those things would still be the same, because you don't have to be autistic to have those. They're part of my personality. So I would definitely have a good job by now, because I'm that type of person who persists at things. If I wasn't autistic, I'd have a good job by now, because that is part of who I am as a go-getter. I would have a good job by now. And I'd also almost certainly have a relationship, okay? Because autism stops me being able to relate to people. It is cruel. I hate autism. I cannot forgive autism for that. So autism is 100% ego dystonic. It is not part of my identity. I, Anna, exist independently of the autism. Okay. And no one can tell me that's wrong, because no one inhabits my brain. I'm not going to tell another autistic person that they're wrong for seeing it's part of their identity. I'm like, good for them. I really wish I could also be happy and content with autism. If maybe if all my autism wasn't as severe as what it is, then maybe I would be like that. But I'm sorry, autism has stopped me in my tracks, and I cannot forgive it. So, anyway. So the argument is, okay, so if we're going to look at maybe what I was talking about earlier, which is more narrow view of the neurodiversity paradigm, this would suggest that some ways of being autistic are benign, or they would be benign in a society that was more accommodating. But others are disadvantageous to those who have them in ways that is not only a matter of injustice, and I would say that's the case for me. Autism is disadvantageous to me because it gets in the way of what I would otherwise choose. Me, the person, the self, the deep self that is not autistic, the part of me that is me, would otherwise choose. So yes, I do very much believe there is a non-autistic, normal, I say normal in inverted commas because I know it gets controversial, and I'm not going to get into the semantics of the term, I'm just using it frivolously, okay, so please don't take this too seriously. That's why I use it in air quotes, okay, you know what I mean, your usual commonplace, colloquial understanding of normal, okay. There is a normal person trapped within here who wants to have all the things that just your average person has. A good job, okay, which I would have if I wasn't autistic. I say that rather emphatically because autism pisses me off. I would have that, and I do feel angry against the autism. I hate the autism. Autism I don't like. I would have that if I wasn't autistic, as I've said, because all things being equal. Also, if I wasn't autistic, my non-verbal IQ would be a lot higher, because again, now I think that's part of a brain problem. I would have normal executive functioning. I would be able to do what I want to do. And that is cruel, but I can't. So I cannot forgive the autism for that. Okay, so as it says here in this article, the unrestricted claim that autism is not a disorder is both theoretically unwarranted and potentially damaging to those whose need for support goes beyond the removal of discrimination. Yep, exactly, because I need a lot of support, and this isn't just about discrimination. In an ideal society, there'll be I'd be able to get that support a lot more easily, and yeah, my life would be a lot easier as a consequence. A lot of additional stress is piled on top of me because we live in this crappy capitalist society that doesn't care about people and only cares about profit. Obviously, if we lived in a society that did care about people and you could get support quickly when you wanted it, straight away, all the support you wanted, without having to fight for it, I'd have a lot less additional stress, and consequently, that's the social model, I guess, in a nutshell. And I agree with it, that's great as far as it goes, and yeah, my life would be a lot easier. But I'd still have all these other problems, and the very fact I need support is not exactly, I'd rather I didn't need a support worker. And your normal average person doesn't need a support worker. They get support through other ways because they're able to have relationships and stuff, but also they don't have all these additional difficulties because they're not autistic. I just wish I was like that normal one-of-the-mill person. Nothing special, just a normal one-of-the-mill average Joe. Because that would mean I would have all the difficulties that come with being human. No one has an easy life, everyone's got difficulties, but I wouldn't have all these additional difficulties that autism brings in its train. And by that, I mean I also wouldn't want a mental illness or anything like that. I just want a healthy brain to be, because I would actually give an arm and a leg just to have a healthy brain. I actually think a healthy brain is probably one of the best things you can have in life, all being equal. So yeah, I just want to go straight. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now, and also I've just been waffling on a little bit, but I want to move on to video number 2 because this video is going to run out of me. But yeah, just to carry on talking about this. So moving over to video number 2 now.